Welcome to this special mini-sode of Hold 'em Accountable. I'm Derrick Holder, and today we're stepping away from utility monopolies, healthcare systems, wages, and all the other ways America finds creative methods of frustrating its citizens. For a few minutes, I want to talk about Pride Month, and more specifically, why I think Pride Month still matters in 2026. Because every June, like clockwork, the same conversation shows up. Some people celebrate, some people complain. Some people ask why Pride Month still exists at all. And if we're being honest, most of us could probably predict every social media argument before it even starts. We hear things like, why isn't there a straight Pride Month? Or why do we still need this? Or haven't we already achieved equality? Whenever those questions come up, I think we're asking the wrong thing because Pride Month isn't really about celebrating being different. It's about remembering why people had to fight to be treated the same. And that's where a lot of the history gets lost. Because for younger Americans, the world can look very different than it did for previous generations. There are people alive today who remember when being openly gay could cost you your job, could cost you your housing, could cost you your reputation, could cost you relationships with family, could cost you almost everything. That history isn't ancient. It's not buried in a textbook somewhere. It's living memory. And whether you're conservative, liberal, progressive, moderate, libertarian, or politically exhausted, history matters. Because if we forget why movements started, we eventually forget what they were trying to solve. Now, I know some of you people watching don't agree with every aspect of modern LGBTQIA plus activism. That's okay. This isn't a loyalty test. You don't have to agree with every activist, every organization, every political position. I don't think that's even how democracy works. But I do think we can recognize something simple. Every American deserves to live their life without fear of discrimination, harassment, violence, or being treated as less than human. That shouldn't be controversial. That should be the floor. And honestly, that's where I approach this issue, not from politics, from basic dignity. Because I've spent enough time in life to realize something. Most people want the same things. They want to be loved. They want to build a life. They want meaningful work. They want family. They want friendship. They want security. They want happiness. They're not nearly as different as cable news would have us believe. And that's one reason Pride Month still exists, because it reminds us that there were people who spent decades fighting for the ability to do things many Americans take for granted. Hold a partner's hand, get married, serve openly, build a family, exist publicly without hiding who they were. Those things matter, whether you personally think about them every day or not. Now, let's talk about something that doesn't get enough attention: the word pride itself. Because a lot of people hear that word and think it means arrogance, celebration, showing off. Historically, that's not really what it meant. Pride was the opposite of shame. For generations, LGBTQIA plus Americans were told they should be ashamed of who they were, ashamed of who they loved, ashamed of how they existed. Pride was a response to that, a way of saying, no, I'm not going to hate myself to make somebody else comfortable. You don't have to agree with every political debate happening in America right now to understand why that message resonated with people. And frankly, I think that's a lesson bigger than any one community, because nobody should have to apologize for existing. Nobody. And if you've followed this show for any amount of time, you know something about me. I believe accountability goes both ways. Always. Government should be held accountable. Corporations should be held accountable. Political parties should be held accountable. Activists and media should be held accountable every day. That means we should be able to have different conversations respectfully, honestly, without immediately assuming the worst about each other. Because if democracy means anything, it means people can disagree while still recognizing each other's humanity. And lately, that feels like a skill we've been losing. The truth is, Pride Month doesn't require you to agree with every political argument happening in America. Doesn't require you to change your religion It doesn't require you to change your values. It doesn't require you to think exactly like someone else does. What it asks at its core is something much simpler: to recognize the humanity of people whose experiences may be different from your own. And that's not a radical idea, that's citizenship. So, why does Pride Month still matter in 2026? Because history matters, dignity matters, equality matters, visibility matters, and because remembering matters. And maybe most importantly, because every generation inherits freedoms it didn't personally have to fight for. And when that happens, it's easy to forget how difficult those fights were. It's also easy to assume these conversations are about somebody else, some distant group, some abstract political debate, when in reality, they're often about people sitting next to you every day, and you may not even know it. For example, most people who watch the show know me as a retired Marine, a husband, a dad, and a guy who spends entirely too much time reading legislation and yelling at spreadsheets. What most people don't know is that I'm also intersexed, and honestly, doesn't come up very often. It's just a fact about me, one part of a much larger life. But it's also a reminder that human beings are often more complicated than the categories we create for them, and that some of the people affected by these conversations are people you'd never expect, which is one reason I think Pride Month still matters. Not because everyone has to agree on every issue, but because visibility matters, understanding matters, and remembering that real people exist behind these debates matters. Pride Month is a reminder, not that America is perfect, not that every debate is settled, not that everyone agrees. A reminder that progress happens because ordinary people decide that exclusion, discrimination, and fear are not acceptable ways to treat their neighbors. That's worth remembering, whether you're celebrating Pride this month or not. So take care of each other, treat people with dignity, have the courage to listen when you disagree, and remember that every person you meet is carrying a story you probably know very little about. I'm Derrick Holder. This has been a Hold 'em Accountable mini-sode. So stay informed, ask questions, and as always, hold them accountable.